think the first time I realized that my job was a bit overwhelming was when I was in my third year of teaching. I always knew it was a difficult job, but I think by the time I got to my third year of teaching, I was starting to question whether I was in the right place. I decided when I was 12 that I wanted to teach and never varied from that decision from that point on. And I knew exactly what I wanted to do and where I wanted to be. And by the time I was in my third year, I tried 3 different grades, different divisions, different types of assignments, trying to find the right fit because nothing felt right. Everything was overwhelming, and I never felt like I was accomplishing what I set out to accomplish. So in my third year, I was working in a school with a primary class, a grade 1-2 split, and the students were they were stressed themselves. So there were a lot of meltdowns in the classroom. There were students being physically violent with one another. I didn't feel like I was having the impact that I wanted to have on the classroom. There were a few students in particular who would have such a difficult time in class, such a high stress level that they wouldn't be able to manage and would react physically, throwing things, hurting their classmates, laying on the ground, kicking and screaming. And I would have to make a decision about whether I would physically stop an altercation from happening or evacuate the rest of the students from the classroom. And I was on my own in the room at that point with the 20 students. And so on a daily basis, I was trying to manage students who were very, very upset and weren't feeling safe. And I felt like I wasn't managing well. So what the stress on the job looked like in my life and looked like for me was a lot of tears and a lot of it had a lot of impact on my self-esteem because I had thought that this thing I was meant to do and this path that was meant for me, I wasn't succeeding. So after the school year, at the end of the school year, I decided it was time to leave the job, and I couldn't bring myself to leave altogether. I couldn't bring myself to quit. So I decided to take advantage of leave of absence, and I actually took half-time leave, which I thought would help to balance the workload and give me a bit less of a workload, and it would help me to maybe regain some of the passion that I had for the job because I wouldn't be there full-time feeling such distress for these students that were so upset in dealing with their own lives at such a young age. So I took a half-time leave of absence, and I used my employee assistance program to seek some counseling, and I found that while it didn't solve the problems, it gave me enough of a break that I could go back to teaching after that and feel a bit rested, feel that I'd made it through my own crisis, and feel that I could come back feeling refreshed. So that was how I used kind of some of the stuff that's worked into our contract to protect us. It was some of the stuff that I made use of to make sure that I could make it through that time. I know that I'm not the only one that's gone through this because I get to, in my profession, work with a lot of amazing colleagues who are open and honest with me about the things that they go through on a daily basis, and their experiences sound a lot like my own. And it's only in the last couple of years that I've really started to use my colleagues as my most important resource, and a resource that has proven invaluable. I can identify colleagues who I can lean on in times of stress, shoulders to cry on, the best hugs in the universe. But I also know that I can use those colleagues for a laugh. So people that I can go to when I need to hear a joke or I need to just laugh away some of the stress of the day. The most important thing I've learned that while tears happen, both my own tears, my students' tears, my colleagues' tears on a regular basis, they're always outweighed by the number of laughs. So the laughter is always there, and it's focusing on those laughs and not focusing on the difficult days that make the job worthwhile and that make the job fun to do. In my third year of teaching, I moved to a new school. I had taught for 2 years at a school where the children came to grade 1 knowing how to read. They had lots of home support. The kids were happy. They came to school not needing much from me other than a fun day. And in my 3rd year, I moved to a new school. I knew little of the school other than I looked at things like the EQAO scores, and this school was struggling a bit more. I looked at things like where the school was located. I looked at things like the population and really the proximity to home. I wanted to lessen my commute. So I got to this new school. I was in my 3rd year. I had a grade 1-2 split, and I was finding it much more challenging. There was a lot of stress and anxiety in my students. They would come to school hungry. They would have a lot of meltdowns and tantrums and things that I was not able to support them in the way that I felt that they needed. And I felt a great disappointment in myself. I felt like I wasn't able to fulfill the role that I was meant to be filling for these kids. I wasn't able to give them the support that they needed. And I felt like by the end of the year with them, I felt like there were other people out there that might have been able to do a better job for them. There was violence in my classroom. For example, I had 2 students who were suspended in grade 2 after having been in a physical altercation, in which one of the students removed a belt and started to chase and hit the other student. And I remember in that incident, there was not only that the aspect of, are my students in danger? Do I need to become physically involved? What are the rules around physically separating them? I haven't been trained, and I know that it's my job, above and beyond everything else, to keep my students safe. So I felt unprepared for that. And then simultaneously, your mind is going to, where did this student in my classroom learn this? Where in their lives have they seen somebody use a belt to hit someone else? And so I'm thinking about their physical welfare and their emotional well-being all at once, and I feel completely helpless. I feel useless. I feel like I'm being totally ineffective, and the rest of the students are there at the same time. So I remember after that year, I felt like, even though I had decided when I was 12 that teaching was for me, I hadn't wavered from that path. At that point in my career, I was done, and I wasn't being effective. I couldn't do it anymore. I needed to get out. And so I think that it was it was a big thought process. I didn't know what the right course of action would be. I didn't feel like I could just walk away. So what I did was I consulted with a lot of people, family, colleagues. I asked advice, and I decided it was time for me to leave, but not permanently. So I took a break, and I used what is in our collective agreement to protect us. So I had a couple of options. I used our employee assistance program for counseling. I took a leave of absence, which is an option that we have, whether it's a part-time leave of absence or a full-time, it's there. And I took some time away. And I've learned since then that it's not uncommon. I have colleagues who use the 4/5 to work for 4 years and take the 5th year off routinely. They'll do it over and over again. And we get our summers off to recharge and step back. I think it's important for us to take breaks when they're needed and to acknowledge that that can be part of the solution and part of the kind of the rhythm and the cadence of the job. I think, in a sense, stress can be a blessing and a curse. With my colleagues, I almost found that when you pick the right colleagues and you pick the right time and you pick the right conversations, they can bond you. When you finally open up to your colleague in the next class over, they can sympathize and they can tell their own story that makes you feel better. And when you're talking to them, you can start to feel less alone. So I think opening up to the colleagues that you're feeling a sense of trust with can be a great thing. With my students, I would find myself more irritable, and I would find that the day in and the day out and the over and over again, it could just really wear you down. But I found that it was the little things that helped, like the being stressed to the point where you don't think you can recover, but you still come back the next day. That's what the kids remember. They remember that you showed up. They don't remember the day that you raised your voice, but they'll remember that you were there every day. So it was focusing on those little positives instead of what felt at the time big negatives. At the time, I asked the students at the time to stop. I used my voice instead of my body because, like I said, I was worried about getting physically involved with these children when they were in an altercation. And so my voice was being ineffective. It wasn't working. So I evacuated the rest of the class, essentially. I got all of the other students out into the hall so that if there were these 2 students who were at risk of being harmed, at least the other 18 would be out of the way. So I got them out. I paged the office. The principal came, which I remember at the time feeling like a bit of a failure, that I had to lean on my administration and had to ask them to come and fix this situation that I couldn't handle on my own. Mm-hmm. But I needed another adult. I couldn't navigate that by myself. In the school, I feel like the union rep is always good to lean on because they're good for just the quick conversation of, hey, this happened, like, what's my next course of action? Do I need to report? Do I need to fill out a form? Do I need to talk to CAS? What are my next steps? What are my obligations? What are my must-dos? And what are my can-dos? So that's a big source of support in my classroom. Also, any teachers with more experience than I have are always a great resource. Challenges in the school that I don't have support for. Probably just class size, because you're in a room with 32 students and that's not going to change. And in fact, it could get bigger as the year goes on if there are new students. So sheer numbers, and a lot of that is experience. You just need time to learn to classroom management techniques. I don't think my job is any easier, to be honest, but I think my coping skills are better. So I think that it's still just as noisy in my class, it's still just as crazy, it's still just as stressful, but I've learned how to manage my stress levels. I've learned some classroom management techniques that help me to diffuse problems or to set a different tone for the day, or to identify issues before they happen and manage them in a way that can de-escalate a situation. But those problems are there every year. It's not that just because I've been in the job longer that those problems don't present themselves. It's just, I guess, in the way that sometimes I manage them, and also sometimes when things go totally wrong, because they still do, that I can remove myself a bit in the sense that I don't take it as personally as I once did. So first I would say you have to be flexible. And when I say that, I know it sounds general. What I mean is, like, be the river. The river just keeps moving. If there are rocks or stones or large animals in the way, the river continues to flow. So you need to just become fluid in the sense that you're willing to go with whatever comes at you, whatever happens that day, if it's a fire drill, if it's a student throwing up, if it's absenteeism, that you have to get student B caught up with everything else while student A wants you to take their permission form. You just go with it, and you understand that you will get to all of the other things like curriculum and assembly. You'll get to that stuff when you get to it. All that stuff will come. So just take it as it comes. Be flexible. The other thing I do is visualizing. So when I feel overwhelmed in a situation, I'll do things like breathing and visualizing to help me remember that this is a small moment in a long life. So I'll do things like I'll picture myself in my classroom, and then I'll zoom out and picture my whole school, and I'll zoom out and I'll picture the city, the province, the country, and I'll remember that I'm just a tiny speck in all of these big things. And that kind of helps me to remember that the situation is not as big and terrible as it might seem at the time. And the third thing, in the classroom, in the moment, I've told my students before, give me a minute. Take out your homework or have a chat with your friend next to you. I'm just going to be at my desk for a minute catching up on some permission forms. Let's just take 10 minutes. Give yourself a break, because you can't be up there all day, doing the dancing monkey, performing, and managing all the time. The classroom might get noisy. Go and sit at your desk, do your thing for 10 minutes, breathe, visualize, go back to it. If you try and come up against resistance or come up against chaos and try and always fight it and beat it down, you're gonna exhaust yourself. So just take a moment for yourself. Outside of the classroom, there's always the obvious. Exercise is important, though unfortunately a lot of times it becomes the first thing to go when you get really busy. I think it's important to make it a priority. So exercise and giving time to your life outside of school. So enjoying your family, enjoying your friends, and not feeling a guilt for not giving all of your time to your job. One of the things that I had to do this year, it's my 7th year on the job, and this light bulb went off this year. I was getting resentful for giving 2 or 3 or 4 hours of my evenings to my job. I used to come home, have dinner, be back at my computer by 6 and work until either I felt I was finished or I had to collapse into bed. And so about 2/3 of the way through the year, I heard a colleague of mine who said he gets up early in the morning to do his planning, and I switched my schedule so that I woke up a bit early. I did my planning before work, and then I would at home, and then I would take off for work, and it changed everything because I had a finite amount of time. I would get up early in the morning, work from 5 to 7. It was 2 hours instead of 4 hours in the evening. And that was one way that I switched my schedule around so that I wasn't feeling resentful for giving up my evenings, so that I wasn't feeling that I could work for 4 hours. I was feeling, I have this amount of time to get it done, be efficient about it, and then I'm not giving up my time with my family.